winter gala smelled of pine resin and expensive wine, a combination that made my stomach turn, or perhaps it was the anxiety. I pressed my spine against the stone pillar near the refreshment table, watching the crowd swirl in elegant patterns I'd never quite learned to follow. Silk gowns whispered secrets as they passed. Laughter erupted in sharp bursts that reminded me of breaking glass. Everyone here belonged to something. A pack, a family, a legacy written in blood and tradition. Everyone except me. My pale blonde hair, twisted into an elaborate braid my roommate had insisted upon, felt too heavy on my head. The dress, borrowed, like everything else about this version of myself, clung in places that made me hyper-aware of how visible I was, despite feeling invisible. This was the annual summit, where packs from across the Northern Territories gathered to renew alliances, settle disputes, and remind people like me exactly where we stood in the hierarchy, unattached. Packless. Tolerated only because I worked in the archives, cataloging histories that belonged to everyone but me. You look like you're planning an escape route. The voice came from my left, warm and teasing. I turned to find a man leaning against the same pillar, though on the opposite side. He was tall, with dark hair that fell carelessly across his forehead, and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which he was doing now, openly, as if my discomfort amused him. He wore the formal attire required of high-ranking pack members. Charcoal suit, silver cufflinks bearing a crest I should probably recognize, but he wore it loosely. Tie already loosened, top button undone. I'm weighing my options, I said, trying for lightness. The north exit looks promising, too obvious. Everyone watches the main doors. He pushed off the pillar and moved closer, close enough that I caught his scent. Cedar and something wilder underneath. The servants' corridor behind the kitchens. That's your best bet. Despite myself, I smiled. You've thought about this. Every year. He extended a hand. Damien Ashford, professional summit avoider and general disappointment to my family. Ashford. The name dropped into my consciousness like a stone into still water, sending ripples of recognition outward. The Ashfords ruled the Northern Territories. They were old blood, old power, the kind of family whose history filled 3 entire shelves in the archives where I worked. I'd spent weeks cataloging their lineage, their battles, their alliances, and if this was Damien Ashford, that meant... You're thinking too hard, he said, still holding his hand out. I can see the wheels turning. Yes, that Ashford. No, I don't bite. Well, not unless asked very nicely. Heat crept up my neck, but I took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, human. For all the power that must run through his bloodline, he felt remarkably normal. Safe, even. Ilara, I said. Professional nobody and general wallflower. Ilara. He said my name like he was tasting it, rolling it around to see how it fit. I don't believe that for a second. Nobody spends this much effort blending into the shadows unless they're hiding something interesting. Before I could respond, a ripple of energy moved through the crowd. It wasn't visible, not exactly, but I felt it. A shift in the air pressure, a collective turning of heads toward the grand staircase at the far end of the hall. The conversations didn't stop, but they lowered, became more careful. Even the musicians seemed to play a shade softer. Showtime, Damien murmured. But he didn't move away. If anything, he shifted slightly closer, creating a small pocket of space that felt separate from the rest of the room. 3 figures descended the staircase. I recognized the man in front from the portraits in the archives, silver-shot black hair, shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of multiple packs, presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Cassius Ashford, the Alpha King's second, advisor, and according to some of the older texts, the real power behind the throne. Beside him walked a woman with copper hair, and a smile sharp enough to cut, and trailing slightly behind, looking bored, was a younger man who shared Damien's features, but wore them differently. Harder, more serious. Your family? I asked quietly. Unfortunately. But there was affection underneath the sarcasm. The silver fox is my Uncle Cassius. The woman who looks like she's planning someone's murder is my cousin Celine. And the one who looks like he swallowed a lemon is... Damien. The command came from the crowd, a woman's voice, cultured and cold. Stop hiding and greet your guests properly. Damien's expression shifted, the easy warmth sliding behind a mask of polite neutrality. Duty calls, he said to me. Don't disappear. I want to hear what makes a wallflower interesting enough to work in our archives." He melted into the crowd before I could correct him. I didn't work in their archives specifically, but in the neutral historical society that served all packs. The distinction mattered to me, even if it didn't to anyone else. I should have retreated then, slipped away to the edges where I belonged. But something kept me rooted. Maybe it was the way Damien had spoken to me like I was worth speaking to. Maybe it was the wine I'd consumed too quickly on an empty stomach. Maybe it was the simple, rebellious urge to exist in a space that usually pretended people like me didn't. I moved along the perimeter of the room, studying the crowd the way I studied historical texts, looking for patterns, connections, the small details that revealed larger truths. The Ashfords stood at the center of everything, quite literally. Family members orbited around them, some close, some distant, all connected by invisible threads of blood and loyalty. Young women, daughters of other powerful families, I assumed, positioned themselves strategically, laughter a bit too bright, gestures a bit too calculated. They're wasting their time. The voice came from beside me again, but this time it wasn't Damien. A young woman had materialized at my elbow, dark curls tumbling past her shoulders, eyes sharp with intelligence. "He won't choose any of them. I'm sorry?" "The Alpha King." She gestured with her wineglass toward the staircase, where a fourth figure had appeared. "Everyone's here hoping to catch his attention, but he doesn't work that way. My mother's been trying to arrange a meeting between him and my sister for 3 years. 3 years. He hasn't so much as looked at her." I followed her gesture and felt my breath catch. He stood at the top of the staircase, surveying the room with an expression that gave nothing away. Where Damien had been warm and approachable, this man was winter itself, beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair cut shorter than his brother's, eyes that even from this distance seemed to see everything. He wore power like a second skin, so natural that it didn't need to announce itself. "That's the Alpha King?" I heard myself ask. In the flesh, Nikolai Ashford. The woman beside me sighed. 32 years old, unmarried, and according to pack law, he has until his 35th birthday to choose a mate, or the council can start making suggestions. Suggestions that look a lot like demands. 3 years. The number settled in my chest with unexpected weight. 3 years for the most powerful man in the Northern Territories to choose a partner, or have one chosen for him. Suddenly, the calculated positioning of the young women made more sense. This wasn't just a party. It was an audition. Nikolai descended the stairs with measured grace, and the crowd parted for him the way water parts around stone. He moved through the sea of potential mates without appearing to notice any of them. His attention focused on something, or someone I couldn't see. Earth to Mystery Girl. Damien had returned, 2 fresh wine glasses in hand. "You looked like you needed a refill." I accepted the glass gratefully, using the moment to steady myself. "Your cousin was just explaining pack politics to me. Was she now?" Damien glanced at the young woman, who had drifted away into the crowd. "Let me guess. She told you all about Nick's deadline, and how every unmated female in a 100-mile radius is here hoping to be chosen?" "Something like that. It's exhausting, honestly. He can't go anywhere without someone's daughter being strategically placed in his path." Damien took a long drink, but that's what happens when you're born to be king. Your whole life becomes about duty and legacy and producing the next generation of Ashfords to carry on the grand tradition. There was something bitter in his voice, something that made me study him more carefully. "And you?" "Me? I'm the spare, the extra, the one who gets to watch from the sidelines and offer commentary." He raised his glass in a mock toast. "It's actually a pretty good deal. All the benefits of the family name, none of the crushing responsibility." But I could hear the lie underneath. Whatever freedom he claimed to enjoy, it came with its own weight. The music shifted, becoming something slower, more formal. Couples began moving toward the center of the room, arranging themselves for the traditional opening dance. I watched, fascinated despite myself, as the hierarchies played out in real time. Who stood where, who danced with whom, how even something as simple as a waltz became a display of power and alliance. "Dance with me?" Damien said suddenly. I nearly dropped my wine glass. "What?" "Dance with me. You're interesting, I'm bored, and if I have to watch one more carefully orchestrated attempt to throw someone at my brother, I'm going to start howling just to break the tension. I'm not supposed to. I fumbled for words, very aware that people like me didn't dance at events like this. We cataloged them afterward, reduced them to dates and names and carefully maintained records. You're at the summit. You're holding a wine glass that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and you're wearing a dress that actually looks good instead of trying too hard. Damien set his glass down and offered his hand again. You're supposed to be here just as much as anyone else. So dance with me, please. Save me from dying of boredom in the middle of my family's very important political theater. And maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was the way he looked at me. Really looked like I was a person and not furniture. But I took his hand. The dance floor felt like stepping onto foreign territory. I knew the basic steps in theory, had watched enough gatherings to understand the general pattern, but theory and practice were very different things. Damien must have felt my tension because he leaned in close, voice low and reassuring. Just follow my lead. And if you step on my feet, I promise not to howl. Despite my nerves, I laughed. He guided me into the flow of dancers with surprising skill, making it look effortless even when I stumbled. Around us, other couples moved in synchronized patterns, but I barely noticed them. This close, I could see the gold flecks in Damien's dark eyes, could feel the solid warmth of his hand at my waist. See? You're a natural, he said. And I realized we'd completed an entire rotation without disaster. I'm really not. You're doing better than half the people here who've been training for this since they could walk. He spun me gently, and for a moment I felt almost graceful. The secret is that everyone's too worried about themselves to pay attention to anyone else, except... He stopped mid-sentence, mid-step, his gaze fixed on something over my shoulder. His expression shifted, became carefully blank in a way that reminded me of how he'd looked when his mother had called to him earlier. Except what? I asked, but the words died as I felt it. That same shift in energy I'd noticed when the family had entered, but stronger now, closer. A hand appeared in my peripheral vision, extended between us. May I cut in? The voice was deep, controlled, laced with authority that made every instinct I had scream to submit, to lower my eyes, to shrink. But something stubborn in me, maybe the same thing that had kept me at this party instead of fleeing, made me look up. Nikolai Ashford stood inches away, those winter-cold eyes fixed directly on me. Up close, he was overwhelming. Taller than Damien, broader through the shoulders, radiating a power that made the air feel thicker. His expression gave nothing away. But there was something in the set of his jaw, the slight tension in his shoulders that suggested he was not asking. Brother, Damien said. And there was a note of challenge in his voice I hadn't heard before. I didn't realize you were interested in dancing tonight. I wasn't. Nikolai's gaze never left my face. Until now. The words hung between us, heavy with meaning I couldn't quite decipher. Around us I could feel the attention of the room turning, feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes suddenly noticing the packless girl who'd somehow ended up between the two most powerful unmated males in the territory. Damien's grip on my hand tightened for just a moment. A question. I could refuse. I could leave. I could do what made sense and remove myself from this situation before it became something more complicated than I could handle. But Nikolai was still standing there, hand still extended. And something in his expression, something beneath the ice and authority, looked almost uncertain. As if my answer mattered, as if I could actually say no, and he would accept it. It's fine, I whispered to Damien, though my heart hammered so hard I was certain they could both hear it. Thank you for the dance. Damien's expression flickered through several emotions too quickly for me to name, finally settling on resignation. He released me carefully, stepped back, and with a slight bow that somehow managed to be both respectful and sardonic, melted back into the crowd, leaving me alone with the Alpha King. Nikolai's hand closed around mine, warm despite the coldness I'd expected. His other hand settled at my waist, professional, proper. But the touch sent electricity racing up my spine. We began to move, and I realized with distant surprise that he danced even better than his brother. Not just technically proficient, but naturally graceful, as if the music moved through him. You're nervous, he said quietly. Yes. There seemed little point in denying it. Don't be. His thumb brushed against my waist, a gesture so small I might have imagined it. "I'm not going to hurt you, Alara." The sound of my name and his voice stopped my breath. "How do you know my name?" For the first time, something like emotion crossed his face. A slight upward curve of his mouth that might have been a smile on someone less controlled. "You work in the archives. You've been cataloging my family's history for 6 months. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" The revelation sent ice through my veins, followed immediately by heat. He'd noticed me. For 6 months, I'd worked in the archives tucked away in the eastern wing of the Ashford estate, handling documents so old they required gloves, piecing together lineages and battle records and treaties that shaped the territories. I'd seen him perhaps twice in passing, always at a distance, always surrounded by advisors or guards. I'd assumed I was invisible, just another staff member cataloging the past, while the important people shaped the future. "I don't understand," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady as we turned through the crowd. "Why would you found an error in the Treaty of 1847. His eyes held mine, intent. "The date was wrong in every published version. You spent 3 weeks cross-referencing original sources until you found the correct documentation. You left a report on my desk explaining how this error had been repeated through generations, and how correcting it affected our current border agreements with the Eastern Pax." I remembered. It had been tedious work, the kind of deep research that most people found unbearably boring. But there had been something satisfying about unraveling the mystery, about finding truth buried under layers of careless copying and assumption. "That's my job," I said. "No. Your job is to catalog. Investigation is something else entirely." The corner of his mouth lifted again, barely perceptible. "You also reorganized the entire classification system for territorial disputes, created a cross-reference guide for pack lineages, and according to my archivist, you can read 3 different historical dialects that most scholars struggle with." The attention felt like standing too close to a fire. "You've been keeping track of my work." "I keep track of everything in my territory." But there was something in his tone that suggested it was more than that. When someone demonstrates both skill and integrity in a place where most people simply go through the motions, I notice. We moved past a cluster of the young women who'd been positioned so carefully throughout the evening. I caught their expressions, confusion melting into hostility, the social calculus visibly recalculating. Whoever I'd been to them before, nobody, nothing, not worth noticing. I'd just become something different, a threat. The Alpha King didn't dance with inconsequential people, and he certainly didn't dance with them while ignoring the daughters of powerful families who'd been arranged like offerings. "You're making a mistake," I said quietly. "Dancing with me, I mean, people will talk. Let them." There was steel underneath the calm. "I don't make decisions based on gossip. But your family, the council, you have responsibilities. I'm aware of my responsibilities." Something sharp entered his voice, the first real edge I'd heard. Every moment of every day I'm reminded of what I owe, what's expected, what the future demands. But this dance, right now, is mine to choose. And I choose to dance with the woman who spent 3 weeks correcting a 100-year-old mistake because it mattered to get the truth right. The music swelled around us, and I let myself be swept along, my earlier clumsiness fading as I matched his rhythm. Around us, the other dancers seemed to blur, becoming irrelevant. It was dangerous, this feeling of being singled out, chosen. People like me didn't get noticed by people like him, and when we did, it rarely ended well. "Wrong brother, by the way," he said, so quietly I almost missed it under the music. "What?" "My brother, Damien." His expression remained neutral, but there was something underneath, not quite jealousy, but close. "He's charming, good at making people comfortable, but he's not for you." The presumption should have offended me. Instead, I felt my pulse quicken. "And you know what's for me? I know he can't give you what you need." His hand tightened slightly at my waist, proprietary. "He'll make you laugh, make you feel safe, and then disappoint you when something more interesting catches his attention. He means well, but he's..." Nikolai seemed to search for words. "He's still figuring out who he is. You deserve someone who already knows. You're very confident in your assessment of a person you just started dancing with. I've been watching you for 6 months, Alara. Through your work, through your choices, through the way you treat the other archivists and the cleaning staff with the same respect you show the senior historians. I may not know your favorite color or what you eat for breakfast, but I know the important things. I know you value truth over convenience. I know you're isolated but not lonely. You've built a life in the spaces between other people's notice, and I know that my brother, for all his good qualities, would treat you like a pleasant distraction instead of what you actually are. Which is? The music ended. Around us, couples separated, applauding politely. But Nikolai didn't release me immediately. For a heartbeat, we stood there in the middle of the dance floor, his hand still at my waist, my hand still in his. Essential, he said finally, and let me go. The word echoed in my head as I stepped back, as the crowd's noise rushed back in, as reality reasserted itself. Essential. To what? To whom? But before I could ask, Cassius appeared at Nikolai's elbow, face carefully neutral, but eyes urgent. A word, nephew. It's important. Nikolai's jaw tightened, but he nodded. To me, he said, "Don't leave. Please, we're not finished talking." Then he was gone, swept away into the machinery of politics and power that defined his existence. I stood there, suddenly alone in the middle of the room, feeling exposed. The young women who'd been watching our dance whispered behind their hands. An older woman with silver-threaded hair stared at me with open calculation, as if trying to figure out what game I was playing. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to not be the center of attention for people who'd spent years learning how to destroy obstacles. The servants' corridor Damien had mentioned earlier beckoned. I slipped away from the main hall, following dimly lit passages that led deeper into the estate. The sounds of the party faded behind me, replaced by the quiet bustle of staff preparing refreshments, cleaning, managing the invisible work that kept events like this running smoothly. Lost or escaping? The voice startled me. I turned to find Celine, Damien's cousin, the one with copper hair and a sharp smile, leaning against the wall of the corridor, a wine glass dangling from her fingers. Both, maybe. She laughed, but it wasn't unkind. Smart. It's a feeding frenzy in there, and you just became the main course. Do you have any idea what you've done? Danced with someone who asked me? You danced with the Alpha King, who never dances, who spent 3 years politely declining every attempt to throw eligible females at him. And then he singles out a packless archivist, dances with her in front of everyone, and looks at her like... Celine paused, searching for words. Like she matters. The way she said it made something in my chest constrict. I'm sure it was just... Don't. Celine pushed off the wall, moving closer. Don't diminish it, and don't pretend it was nothing. Nick doesn't do casual. He doesn't do spontaneous. Everything he does is calculated, considered, meaningful. If he danced with you, it's because he's been thinking about it, probably for a while. You're making it sound like he's interested? He is. Celine's expression shifted, became more serious. Look, I'm telling you this because you seem genuinely clueless about what's happening, and I'd rather you understand than get eaten alive. My cousin needs a mate. The council is pressuring him, his time is running out, and every family with an unmated daughter has been positioning for years. You just jumped to the front of the line without even trying. That makes you either very lucky or very doomed. Possibly both. I leaned back against the cool stone wall, trying to process. I don't want to be in any line. I'm just trying to do my job and not cause problems. Too late for that. But Selena's smile was almost sympathetic. For what it's worth, I think you'd be good for him. He needs someone real, someone who isn't performing every second. Someone who corrects historical records because accuracy matters, not because it'll win political points. She raised her glass in a small salute. But be careful. The families who've been investing in their daughters' chances aren't going to take this lying down. And the council. They have their own ideas about what the Alpha King's mate should be. Before I could respond, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Damien appeared, slightly out of breath, scanning the space until he found me. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. Celine glanced between us, something knowing in her expression. I'll leave you two to talk, but Alara? Remember what I said. Be careful. She slipped away, leaving me alone with Damien in the dim corridor. He looked different than he had on the dance floor. More serious, less performatively casual. You should probably avoid me for the rest of the evening, he said without preamble. My brother just made his interest very clear, and I'm not interested in starting a family drama. I didn't ask for any of this, I know. He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting the careful styling. And that's probably why he's interested. Everyone else has been performing for him, trying to be what they think he wants. You were just... you. Dancing badly, looking uncomfortable, being honest about not belonging. He smiled, but it was tinged with something sad. It's refreshing, apparently. You're not angry? Angry, no, resigned, maybe a little. He leaned against the opposite wall, mirroring my posture. I like talking to you. You're interesting, and you don't treat me like I'm either a prize or a disappointment. But Nick's my brother, and he's the Alpha King, and when he decides he wants something... Damien shrugged. I'm not going to compete with that. The easy acceptance stung more than anger would have. I'm not a thing to be competed over. No, you're not. His expression grew serious, which is why I'm telling you this. Nick is a good man, but being with him isn't easy. Everything becomes about duty and territory and legacy. Your life stops being yours and becomes part of something bigger. If you're okay with that, if you think whatever he's offering is worth the cost, then I'm happy for you both. But if you're not sure, he pushed off the wall, moved closer. The servants' exit is 2 doors down on the left. It leads to the East Gardens. From there, you can reach the staff quarters without going back through the main hall. No one will stop you. No one will even know you left. He was offering me an escape, a chance to return to my quiet, invisible life before this night complicated everything. It was tempting. Safe. Thank you, I said quietly. Damien nodded, started to turn away, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you'd be good for him too. He's been alone for a long time, even surrounded by people. Maybe you understand what that's like. Then he was gone, footsteps fading back toward the party. I stood in the empty corridor, weighing my options. The exit was right there. I could slip away, return to the archives tomorrow, pretend this night had been a strange dream. Maybe Nikolai would forget about me, move on to someone more suitable. Maybe I could go back to being invisible. But even as I thought it, I knew it was a lie. Whatever had happened tonight had changed something fundamental. You couldn't unknow being seen, being chosen, being called essential by someone whose opinion shaped the fate of territories. I thought about the way Nikolai had looked at me, the certainty in his voice when he'd said his brother wasn't for me. The presumption should have been insulting, but instead it had felt like recognition, like he'd seen something in me I'd barely acknowledged to myself. I didn't belong at parties like this. I didn't belong in the world of pack politics and calculated alliances, but maybe, just maybe, I belonged in the quiet spaces between, the places where truth mattered more than performance. The door to the garden stood open, cool night air drifting through. Beyond it, I could see moonlight on manicured hedges, the promise of solitude and safety. I turned and walked back toward the party. The main hall had transformed in my absence. The formal dancing had given way to smaller groups, conversations flowing with the lubrication of expensive wine. I scanned the crowd, looking for Nikolai, but found his uncle Cassius instead. The older man stood with a group of distinguished-looking people, council members I guessed from their bearing, and the deference others showed them. One of them, a woman with iron-gray hair and a face like carved granite, met my eyes across the room. Her expression was cold, assessing. When she leaned in to whisper something to Cassius, I didn't need supernatural hearing to know I was the subject. A hand touched my elbow, making me jump. I turned to find a young woman about my age with kind eyes and a nervous smile. Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I'm Mira. I work in the kitchens. The Alpha King sent me to find you. He wants to see you in the North Study, 3rd floor, end of the hall. He said to tell you. She paused, as if making sure she had the words right. He said to tell you that you don't have to come if you don't want to, but he hopes you will. My heart hammered. A private meeting, away from the crowd. It could mean anything. Everything. Thank you, Mira. She smiled, relieved to have completed her task, and melted back into the flow of servers moving through the room. I should have been afraid. Should have been cautious. But as I climbed the grand staircase, following Mira's directions through corridors that grew quieter with each turn, what I felt was curiosity, and underneath that, a strange certainty that whatever happened next, I was exactly where I needed to be. The north study door was slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the hallway. I paused at the threshold, suddenly uncertain. Then I heard his voice from inside. "Come in, Ilara. Please." I pushed the door open. The study was smaller than I'd expected, more personal. Books lined the walls, well-worn volumes that looked actually read rather than decorative. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows. Nikolai stood by the window, still in his formal attire but with his jacket removed, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that spoke of someone who did more than delegate physical work. He turned when I entered, and in the firelight, his expression was less controlled, more human. "You came back," he said, and I heard the relief underneath. I almost didn't. "I know. Damien offered you an escape route, didn't he? He's good at that. Seeing when people need a way out." Nikolai moved closer, stopping a careful distance away. "Did you want to use it? I'm here, aren't I?" "You are. But I need to know." He paused, seeming to struggle with words in a way that surprised me. This was the Alpha King, a man who commanded territories and negotiated with council members and foreign pacts. But right now, in this quiet room, he looked uncertain. "I need to know if you're here because you want to be, or because you think you have to be." The question hung between us, important in ways that went beyond this single moment. "I don't have to do anything," I said carefully. "I'm packless. I don't belong to anyone. I answer to the Historical Society, not to you or any Alpha. I could walk out of here right now and return to my work tomorrow, and there's nothing you could do to stop me." Something flashed in his eyes, satisfaction, maybe, or respect. "That's true. But I came back because I searched for the right words, for truth instead of what might be expected. Because you saw me, really saw me, and because when you said I was essential, you meant it. Even if I don't fully understand what you meant." Nikolai crossed the remaining distance between us in 3 strides, stopping close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "I meant that in 6 months of watching you work, watching you move through a world that treats you as disposable, I've seen more integrity and genuine strength than I've found in most people who spend their lives positioning for power. I meant that when you corrected that treaty error, you did it because it was right, not because it would benefit you. I meant that you're exactly what I didn't know I was looking for." His hand rose, hesitated, then gently cupped my face. The touch was careful, asking permission even as it claimed space. "I'm not easy to be with," he continued quietly. "My life is complicated, public, full of obligations I can't escape. If you choose this, choose me, it won't be simple. But it will be real. I promise you that." The fire crackled. Outside, the faint sounds of the party continued, but in this room, in this moment, the world had narrowed to his hand on my face, his eyes on mine, the weight of a choice that would change everything. "I don't know how to be what you need," I whispered. "You already are." His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, a gesture so tender it made my chest ache. "That's the point." And when he kissed me, careful and deliberate and full of restrained hunger, I kissed him back. Not because I had to, not because of duty or expectation or political advantage, but because I chose to. The kiss ended slowly, reluctantly, like neither of us wanted to be the first to pull away. When we finally separated, Nikolai rested his forehead against mine, his breath warm against my lips. For a moment, we simply existed in that space between, not quite separate, not quite together. "I should take you back to the party," he said, though he made no move to step away. "People will notice your absence. They'll talk. Let them talk." I borrowed his words from earlier, surprising myself with the boldness. "You said this moment was yours to choose." A low sound rumbled in his chest. Not quite a laugh, but close. "Careful. If you keep saying things like that, I won't want to let you leave this room." The implication sent heat through my veins, but reality crept back in with it. Beyond this study, beyond this stolen moment, the world waited with all its complications. "What happens now?" Nikolai straightened, his hand sliding from my face to capture my hand instead. He studied our intertwined fingers like they held answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. "Now, I do something I should have done months ago. I make my intentions clear, publicly, before the council can start their maneuvering." The council. They have opinions about who I should choose. Strong opinions backed by political pressure and territorial alliances. His jaw tightened. For 3 years, I've listened to their suggestions, attended their arranged meetings, entertained their parade of suitable candidates. All women from powerful families, all perfectly positioned to strengthen existing alliances or forge new ones. All utterly wrong. I thought of the iron-haired woman who'd stared at me with such cold assessment. They won't approve of me. No, they won't. He said it matter-of-factly, without apology. You bring no political advantage, no territorial connections, no powerful family to shore up our borders. By their calculations, you're the worst possible choice. The words should have hurt, but his tone told a different story. And by your calculations? By mine? His grip on my hand tightened. You're the only choice that makes sense. Because I don't need a political alliance disguised as a marriage. I need a partner. Someone who understands the weight of truth, the importance of integrity, the value of seeing clearly instead of through the lens of advantage. He pulled me closer, his free hand settling at my waist. I need someone who spent 3 weeks correcting a treaty error that no one else even noticed was wrong. Someone who reorganizes classification systems at midnight because disorder bothers her. Someone who treats cleaning staff with the same respect as council members because she measures worth differently than everyone else. You really have been watching me, I said softly, every day. Every chance I could find. A hint of vulnerability crept into his expression. Did you never wonder why I walked past the archives so often? Why I always seemed to have business in the East Wing? I thought back over the past months, remembering the times I'd glanced up from my work to catch a glimpse of him in the corridor. Always in conversation with someone, always moving with purpose. I'd assumed the archives were simply on his route to somewhere more important. I thought it was coincidence. There are no coincidences in my life. Everything is scheduled, planned, controlled. He brushed a strand of pale blonde hair back from my face. Except this. Except you. You're the first thing in 3 years that's felt like choice instead of obligation. A knock at the door shattered the moment. Cassius's voice came through, carefully neutral. Nikolai, the council is asking for you. They've heard about your dance and they want to discuss the implications. Nikolai's expression hardened, the vulnerability disappearing behind the mask of authority I'd seen earlier. Tell them I'll address the council in the morning. They're insisting it be tonight, then they can continue insisting. Steel entered his voice. I'm not a child to be summoned for a scolding. If they want to discuss my choices, they can wait until I'm ready to discuss them. A pause. Then, quieter, almost amused. Understood. I'll convey your message. Though perhaps with slightly more diplomatic phrasing. Footsteps retreated down the hall. Nikolai's shoulders remained tense, his jaw set in a way that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd pushed back against council demands. I'm causing problems for you. I said, no. I'm causing problems for them by refusing to be managed. He turned back to me, some of the hardness fading. This was always going to happen, Ilara. The moment I made a choice that didn't align with their plans, there would be conflict. Better it happens over someone worth fighting for. The words settled in my chest, heavy with meaning. You barely know me. I know enough. And I want to know everything else. He traced his thumb across my knuckles, a gesture that felt more intimate than it should. Your favorite books. What you think about when you can't sleep. Why you chose archival work when you could have done anything. What made you leave whatever pack you came from. Or if you were born packless. What scares you. What makes you laugh. His eyes met mine, intense. I want to know all of it. Every piece. And I want you to know me the same way. Not the alpha king, not the public figure, but the person underneath. That's not how this usually works, is it? Arranged matings, political alliances. Nothing about this is usual. He released my hand, only to cup my face with both of his, holding me gently but firmly, as if I might disappear. I'm not asking for an arrangement. I'm asking for something real, something that starts with choice and builds from there. No contracts, no negotiations, no council interference. Just us, figuring out if this, he gestured between us, is what it feels like it could be. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was too much, too fast. Yesterday I'd been invisible, and now the Alpha King was offering me something that looked suspiciously like a future. And if the council refuses, if they forbid it, they can't forbid anything. I'm the Alpha King. But I heard the tension underneath. They can make things difficult. They can withdraw support, turn other alphas against me, create problems that require my attention elsewhere. But they can't choose my mate. That's the one thing pack law guarantees. The alpha's choice is sovereign, even if it's a terrible political decision. Especially then. A fierce smile crossed his face. Our laws were written by people who understood that strength comes from more than alliances and territory. It comes from having someone at your side who makes you better, who sees clearly when everyone else is blinded by politics. Our most successful alphas weren't the ones who married strategically. They were the ones who chose partners who challenged them, balanced them, made them more than they could be alone. He was painting a picture I wanted desperately to believe in, but reality kept intruding, cold and unavoidable. The women downstairs, the ones from powerful families, they hate me now. I saw how they looked at me. Let them hate you. Their opinions don't matter. They matter if they make your life harder. If they cause problems for your pack. Ilara. He said my name like an anchor, pulling me back from spiraling worry. Look at me. Really look at me. I met his eyes, saw the certainty there, the unwavering focus. I've spent 3 years being told what I should want, who I should choose, how I should lead. 3 years of everyone having an opinion about my life, while treating me like a prize to be won, or a problem to be solved. You're the first person who's looked at me like I'm just a man. Someone who makes mistakes, who gets things wrong, who might not have all the answers. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. Do you understand how rare that is, how necessary? I did understand, because I'd spent years being invisible, and he'd spent years being too visible, both of us lost in different ways. Both searching for something authentic in a world built on performance and expectation. I'm scared, I admitted. Good. So am I. The confession surprised me. I'm terrified that I'm moving too fast, that I'm overwhelming you, that you'll wake up tomorrow and realize this is insane. I'm terrified the council will find a way to poison this before it has a chance to grow. I'm terrified that I'm being selfish, pulling you into my complicated life because I'm lonely, and you feel like air after years of suffocating. He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. But I'm more terrified of letting you walk away without trying, of spending the rest of my life wondering what if. The vulnerability in his words cracked something open inside me. This wasn't the Alpha King speaking. This was Nikolai, a man who carried too much weight and wore loneliness like a second skin. I don't know how to do this, I said. I don't know how to be with someone like you. I don't know the rules, the expectations, what's required. There are no rules, not between us. He pressed his forehead to mine again, grounding us both. We figure it out as we go, together. Making mistakes, learning, building something that's ours, instead of what everyone else thinks it should be. The council meeting tomorrow will be difficult. They'll question my judgment, present alternatives, make arguments about duty and legacy and political necessity. His hands slid down to my shoulders, steady and warm. But I'll handle it. That's my burden to carry, not yours. All I need from you is honesty. If you want this, want to see where this goes, tell me. If you don't, if this is too much too fast, tell me that too. Either way, your position in the archives is secure. Your life is yours regardless of what happens between us. He was giving me an out, making it clear I could refuse without consequences. The kindness of it, the respect, made my decision easier. I want to try, I said quietly. I'm scared and confused and completely out of my depth, but I want to see what this could be. The relief that washed over his face was profound, transforming his features from controlled to openly emotional. Thank you, he breathed, and kissed me again. Deeper this time, less careful, more honest. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his hands on either side of my face, thumbs tracing gentle patterns. Stay tonight. Not here. Not like that. But in the guest wing. Let me show you that tomorrow isn't just words. Let me introduce you to my world properly, not through stolen moments at a party. People will talk even more. People are already talking. Let them. He smiled, and it was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way that made him look younger. Besides, I want to have breakfast with you, want to hear what you think about the books in this study, want to show you parts of the estate you've never seen, want to be selfish for one morning before the council and duty and politics crash back in. How could I refuse that? How could I walk away from someone offering not just passion, but presence? Not just desire, but genuine interest in who I was beyond this moment. One morning, I agreed. Then we face whatever comes next. Together, he confirmed, sealing it with another kiss that tasted like promises neither of us was sure we could keep, but both of us were willing to try. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through unfamiliar windows. I woke in the guest wing's most luxurious room, surrounded by silk sheets and carved furniture that probably cost more than I'd earned in my entire life. For a moment, I lay there disoriented, piecing together the previous night, the party, the dances, the kiss, Nikolai's quiet intensity as he'd walked me to this room and bid me goodnight with a restraint that had felt like a promise. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Miss Alara?" Mira's voice came through the door. "The Alpha King asked me to see if you needed anything. Breakfast will be ready in an hour, and he said to tell you there's no rush. Also, I brought some clothes if you'd like to change." I opened the door to find her holding a simple but elegant dress. Deep forest green, well made but not ostentatious. "This is too much," I started to protest. "It's from Lady Celine's wardrobe. She said you two are about the same size, and that you'd probably feel uncomfortable wearing borrowed party clothes to breakfast." Mira smiled conspiratorially. "She also said to tell you that half the estate is gossiping about you, so you might as well look good while they do it." Despite my nerves, I laughed. That sounds like her. An hour later, dressed and as prepared as I could be, I followed a servant through corridors I'd never seen. Not the public spaces where parties happened, but the private family wing, smaller rooms, personal touches, spaces that felt lived in rather than displayed. We passed a library where Damien sat reading, who looked up and gave me a small nod and a genuine smile that held no resentment. We passed a training room where younger pack members sparred under the watchful eye of an instructor who paused to study me with open curiosity. Finally, we reached a sun-filled breakfast room where Nikolai sat reading reports, a cup of coffee growing cold at his elbow. He looked up when I entered, and the transformation in his expression, from focused concentration to open warmth, made something flutter in my chest. "You came," he said, standing. "You asked me to. I did, but I wasn't sure you wouldn't wake up, reconsider, and flee back to the archives." He pulled out a chair for me, a gesture of courtesy that felt natural, rather than performative. "How did you sleep?" Like I'd been transported to a fairy tale, and wasn't sure if I'd wake up as myself, or discover it was all a dream. He smiled, pouring coffee for me without asking if I wanted it. Somehow knowing I did. If it's a dream, we're both having it. I woke up convinced I'd imagined last night, that I'd hallucinated the entire conversation out of desperation. We settled into breakfast, and for a while it was surprisingly easy. He asked about my work, actually listening when I explained the intricacies of document preservation and historical cross-referencing. I asked about his responsibilities, learning about territory management and pack dynamics, and the constant balancing act between tradition and progress. We talked about books, discovering a shared love of historical fiction, an argument over whether accuracy or storytelling mattered more. We debated philosophy, laughed over ridiculous historical anecdotes I'd found in old records, and for an hour, we were just two people sharing a meal, until Cassius appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. "The council is assembled," he said without preamble. "They've been waiting for an hour. This can't be delayed any longer, Nikolai." The easy warmth drained from the room. Nikolai's expression shifted back to the controlled mask I'd seen at the party. The Alpha King, rather than the man who debated fictional narratives over coffee. "I'll be there shortly. They're demanding to meet her." Cassius's gaze flickered to me. "They want to assess whether this is a serious intention or a passing fancy. My intentions are none of their concern." "You know that's not true." Cassius moved into the room, and I could see the family resemblance. The same sharp intelligence, the same contained power. "You're the Alpha King. Everything you do is their concern, whether you like it or not. And choosing a packless woman with no political connections over the daughters they've been grooming for years, that's going to have consequences. Let it have consequences." Nikolai's voice was steel. "I won't be managed. I'm not asking you to be managed. I'm asking you to be strategic." Cassius glanced at me again, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Ilara, forgive the bluntness, but you're walking into a situation you may not fully understand. The council isn't just going to voice disapproval. They're going to try to dismantle this before it begins. They'll question your character, your intentions, your fitness to stand beside an alpha king. They'll look for any weakness they can exploit. My mouth went dry. What kind of weakness? Anything. Past relationships, family history, debts, mistakes, moments of poor judgment. They'll dig into your life and twist whatever they find to support their argument that you're unsuitable. He looked back at Nikolai. Which is why I'm suggesting you slow this down. Date her privately. Let people adjust to the idea gradually, instead of forcing a confrontation while tensions are high. No. Nikolai's response was immediate. Doing it gradually just gives them more time to sabotage and scheme. I make my position clear now, publicly, and dare them to challenge it directly. That's pride talking, not strategy. That's conviction. Nikolai stood, moving to stand beside my chair, a physical statement of allegiance. I've spent 3 years letting them think they have influence over this decision. That ends now. Either they accept my choice, or we have a larger conversation about the limits of council authority. Cassius's expression tightened. You'd risk a political crisis over a woman you met yesterday? I'd risk a political crisis over the principle that I don't need their permission to live my life. Nikolai's hand settled on my shoulder, warm and grounding. And for a woman I've been learning about for 6 months, who represents everything I value more than political convenience. The two men stared at each other, a silent battle of wills playing out in the sunny breakfast room. Finally, Cassius sighed, then at least prepare her, let her know what she's walking into. After Cassius left, Nikolai knelt beside my chair, taking my hands in his. I'm sorry. This isn't how I wanted this morning to go. What will they do? The council? Question you. Extensively. About your background, your family, your intentions. They'll try to make you feel small, inadequate, like you don't belong. His grip tightened. But you don't have to face them. Not yet. I can handle this alone, make my position clear without subjecting you to their interrogation. It was tempting. So tempting. But I thought about what he'd said last night. About needing someone who could stand beside him, who could handle the weight of his world. If I hid now, let him fight this battle alone. What did that say about whether I could actually be what he needed? I should meet them, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. If we're doing this, really doing this, they need to see I'm not hiding behind you. Something fierce and proud flashed in his eyes. You don't have to prove anything to them, maybe not. But I need to prove something to myself. I stood, pulling him up with me. I've spent years being invisible, letting people overlook me because it was easier than being seen. But you saw me, Nikolai. You chose me. The least I can do is show up. He pulled me close, kissing my forehead with a tenderness that steadied my racing heart. Whatever happens in that room, remember, their opinions don't change mine. Their disapproval doesn't diminish you. You're not on trial, even though they'll try to make it feel that way. What if they're right, though? What if I'm not equipped for this? Then we'll figure it out together. Being equipped isn't about knowing everything in advance. It's about being willing to learn, to adapt, to face challenges as they come. He cupped my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. You've already shown more courage than most people ever will. You came back last night when you could have run. You're standing here now, preparing to face a room full of powerful people who don't want you there. That's not weakness, Alara. That's strength. The council chamber was darker than I'd expected. All heavy wood and stern portraits of previous Alpha Kings staring down from the walls. A long table dominated the center, with 7 people seated along one side, the iron-haired woman I'd seen at the party. 2 older men with matching expressions of disapproval, a younger woman with calculating eyes, and 3 others whose names I didn't know but whose hostility was palpable. Nikolai entered first, every inch the Alpha King, shoulders back, expression controlled, radiating authority. I followed a step behind, feeling every pair of eyes track my movement. Council, Nikolai said, his voice formal. I understand you wanted to discuss last night's events. Events? The iron-haired woman, who I learned was Councillor Thorne, stood, her posture aggressive. You danced with a nobody in front of the entire summit, ignoring every suitable candidate present. And you call it an event? You created a spectacle, Nikolai. You embarrassed the families who've invested years in their daughter's preparation. You undermined our carefully built alliances. I danced with the woman I intend to court, Nikolai corrected calmly. If that embarrassed anyone, they embarrassed themselves by assuming they had claim to my choices. Court? One of the older men laughed, sharp and dismissive. You mean bed. Let's not pretend this is about courtship. You've decided you want a plaything and you're dressing it up as something more significant. I felt the insult like a physical blow, but Nikolai's hand found mine, squeezing once, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Careful, Counselor Drake, Nikolai said quietly, dangerously. You're speaking about the woman I intend to make my mate. Show her the respect that position demands, or remove yourself from this chamber. Stunned silence. Making intentions clear was one thing. Declaring mate bonds was something else entirely. You can't be serious, Counselor Thorne said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. She's packless. She has no family connections, no political value, no training in pack dynamics or leadership. She works in the archives for God's sake. She catalogs the past while we're trying to build a future. She preserves truth while everyone else rewrites it to suit their purposes, Nikolai countered. She sees clearly while the rest of you see through the lens of advantage. And she's shown more genuine integrity in 6 months than most of your suitable candidates have in their entire carefully curated lives. Integrity doesn't run a territory, the calculating-eyed woman said. It doesn't negotiate treaties or manage pack conflicts or produce heirs who'll carry on the bloodline. No, but it does something more important. It provides a foundation of trust, something I found in short supply around this table. The accusation hung in the air, heavy with implication. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. If I may speak, my voice surprised everyone, including myself. All eyes turned to me, most hostile, some merely curious. Nikolai squeezed my hand again, supportive but not speaking for me. This was my moment to claim. I understand your concerns, I said, working to keep my voice steady. You see someone with no obvious qualifications, no political connections, no apparent reason to be standing here. From your perspective, I'm a liability rather than an asset. I met Counselor Thorne's eyes directly. But maybe that's exactly the point. Maybe what the Alpha King needs isn't another political alliance or strategic advantage. Maybe he needs someone who sees him as a person first and a position second. Someone who has nothing to gain from him except his company, his partnership, his honest self. Pretty words, Drake said dismissively, but when the Eastern Pacts challenge our borders, when the Council from the Southern Territories demands renegotiation, when real problems require real solutions, what will your honest partnership accomplish then? I don't know, I admitted. I'm not a politician or a warrior or a diplomat, but I am a researcher. I spend my days finding connections others miss, correcting errors that have compounded over generations, understanding context and nuance. Maybe those skills translate to other problems. Maybe they don't. But I'm willing to learn, to grow into whatever this position demands, rather than arriving with preconceptions about how things should be done. She's had 6 months of access to our family records, Counselor Thorne said suddenly, her eyes narrowing. Sensitive information, historical details that could be valuable to rival packs. How do we know this isn't a long game? Get close to the Alpha King, gain his trust, extract information. The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed, but Nikolai's entire body tensed beside me, his voice dropping to a tone that made even the council members look nervous. If you're suggesting that Alara is a spy or a manipulator, provide evidence or retract the accusation immediately, he said, each word carefully controlled, because I won't tolerate baseless character assassination in this chamber. I'm suggesting we know nothing about her, Thorne pressed, though less confidently. No family history, no pack affiliation, no references beyond her supervisor at the Historical Society. For all we know, for all you know, she's exactly who she appears to be, someone trying to live quietly and do honest work. Nikolai's voice could have cut glass. Someone whose only crime is catching my attention without trying. If you want to investigate her background, do so. You'll find nothing concerning because there's nothing to find. But I'm done entertaining paranoid conspiracy theories disguised as legitimate concern. The room fell silent. I could feel the power dynamics shifting, the council realizing they'd pushed too far, too fast. Finally, Cassius spoke from where he'd been standing quietly by the door. Perhaps we're approaching this incorrectly. Rather than treating this as a crisis, why not view it as an opportunity? The Alpha King has made his interest clear. Give them time to prove whether this connection has substance. If it fails naturally, no harm done. If it succeeds, the pack gains a leader who chose from conviction rather than obligation. Either way, trying to force a different outcome will only create resentment and division. It was a masterful reframing, giving everyone a path forward that didn't require anyone to surrender their position entirely. Councillor Thorne looked like she wanted to argue further, but the mood had shifted. The other council members were nodding slowly, seeing the wisdom in stepping back, rather than forcing a confrontation they might not win. Very well, Thorne said finally, though her expression remained cold. But we'll be watching closely, and if this proves to be a mistake, the council reserves the right to revisit the question of suitable matches. Watch all you want, Nikolai said. But understand, this isn't a trial period for your benefit. This is my life, and I'm living it on my terms. Council input has been noted and will be given exactly the weight it deserves. He turned, offering me his arm, and together we walked out of the council chamber. Not fleeing, not rushing, but moving with dignified purpose. Behind us I could hear the immediate eruption of voices, arguing, debating, but we didn't stop. Only when we were several corridors away did Nikolai finally pause, pulling me into an alcove and wrapping his arms around me tightly. You were incredible, he said into my hair. The way you spoke to them, the way you held your ground. I've never seen anyone face down the council like that without flinching. I was terrified, I admitted, letting myself lean into his strength. I know. That's what made it brave. He pulled back just enough to see my face. They'll make this difficult, Alara. They'll look for ways to undermine us, to prove I made a mistake. Are you sure you want to deal with that? I thought about the easy morning we'd shared, the conversations that had felt natural and right. I thought about the way he looked at me, really looked, seeing the person rather than the position or lack thereof. I thought about the fact that for the first time in years, I felt genuinely seen and chosen. I'm sure, I said, whatever comes next, we face it together. His kiss was answer enough, fierce and possessive and full of promise that tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after, would be worth fighting for. 3 months passed like a storm and a dream intertwined. The council's scrutiny became a constant presence, investigators quietly asking questions about my past, my work suddenly subject to additional oversight, invitations to pack gatherings that felt more like tests than social events. But Nikolai had been right about one thing. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. I was exactly who I appeared to be. A woman who'd grown up on the fringes of pack society, found solace in books and history, and built a quiet life around work that mattered to me. What they couldn't account for, what seemed to frustrate them most, was how naturally Nikolai and I fit together. The relationship they'd expected to be performative or strategic instead grew roots in genuine connection. He'd arrive at the archives after long council meetings, settling into the chair across from my desk to decompress by listening to me explain whatever historical mystery I was unraveling. I'd join him for early morning runs through the estate grounds, learning the territory and the pack members who lived there, slowly building relationships of my own. Damien became an unexpected ally. He'd stop by the archives one afternoon, ostensibly to return a book, really to check how I was handling everything. "You're doing better than I expected," he'd said, perching on the edge of my desk with his characteristic casual ease. "Most people would have cracked under the pressure by now. The council's been relentless. They're just doing what they think is right for the pack," I'd replied, trying to be fair even to people who clearly wanted me gone. "That's generous of you, considering Councillor Thorne tried to have your employment with the Historical Society reviewed last week." He'd smiled wryly at my surprise. Nick shut it down fast, but still, they're not playing nice. Neither am I, apparently. I'm still here. "Yeah, you are." His expression had grown more serious. "For what it's worth, I think you're good for him. He's different now. Lighter somehow. Like he's not carrying everything alone anymore." That matters more than political alliances or council approval. Celine had been equally supportive, though in her own sharp-edged way. She'd appointed herself my unofficial guide to pack politics, teaching me who held real power versus who just made noise, which families could be trusted, and which were waiting for an opportunity to strike. "Councillor Thorne is your biggest problem," she'd explained over lunch one day, spreading documents across the table like battle plans. "She's convinced that her niece, the calculating one you met at the council meeting, should have been Nick's choice. She's taken this personally, and she won't let it go easily. What can she actually do, though? Nikolai made his decision clear. She can make things difficult in 100 small ways. Slow down approvals he needs, question his judgment on other matters, turn allies into skeptics by suggesting he's too distracted by a relationship to lead effectively. Celine had met my eyes seriously. She can't force him to choose differently, but she can create enough chaos that staying together becomes harder than walking away. That won't work, I'd said with more confidence than I felt. I know. I've watched you two together. This isn't some whirlwind romance that'll burn out under pressure. It's the real thing. She'd smiled then, genuine warmth breaking through her usual sardonic exterior. Which is why Thorne's going to fail. She's fighting tactics when she should be accepting reality, but reality proved more complicated than Celine's confidence suggested. 6 weeks after the council meeting, Eastern Pac tensions escalated into something that demanded Nikolai's full attention. Border disputes, territorial challenges, threats of violence if agreements weren't renegotiated. He was gone for 2 weeks, buried in negotiations that determined whether the territories would maintain peace or slide toward conflict. During those weeks, I learned what it truly meant to be connected to someone with his responsibilities. The worry that sat heavy in my chest. The way time stretched when I didn't know if he was safe. The loneliness of sleeping in a bed that had started to feel like ours, now empty except for me. But I also learned something else. I could exist in this world without him beside me. I continued my work, building relationships with other pack members who'd initially been skeptical but slowly warmed to my presence. I had dinner with Cassius, who proved surprisingly good company once the council formality dropped away, sharing stories about Nikolai's childhood that made the Alpha King seem wonderfully, endearingly human. I trained with the pack warriors at Celine's insistence, learning basic self-defense not because I expected to fight, but because understanding their world meant understanding all aspects of it. When Nikolai finally returned, exhausted, stressed, but successful in preventing the conflict, he found me in the estate library, reorganizing a section that had been neglected for years. "You stayed," he said from the doorway, and I heard the vulnerability underneath. I set down the book I'd been holding and crossed to him. "Of course I stayed. Where else would I be? I thought—" He pulled me close, holding tighter than usual. "The council's been worse while I was gone, haven't they? Thorne made comments about how you were managing without me, suggested maybe this was too difficult." "It was difficult," I admitted. "But not impossible. Not even close to impossible." I pulled back to look at him. "I missed you. Constantly. But I also proved something to myself. That I can exist in your world, handle your responsibilities, be part of this pack even when you're not physically present. I'm not just here because you chose me. I'm here because I choose this life." Something in his expression cracked open. Relief and love and gratitude all tangled together. "I don't deserve you. You're right. You deserve someone much less stubborn who doesn't reorganize your library without permission." He laughed, the sound exhausted but genuine, and kissed me like a man finding home after too long away. The turning point came unexpectedly, 2 months after that reunion. A young pack member, barely 20, newly presented as Omega, scared and overwhelmed, appeared at the archives asking for me specifically. Her name was Riley, and she'd heard through the pack network that I understood what it meant to feel out of place, to not quite fit the expected molds. "Everyone keeps telling me what I should do, how I should act, what my role means," she'd said, tears threatening. "But none of it feels right. I thought maybe you'd understand. Everyone says you don't fit either, but you're still here." I'd spent hours with her, not giving advice so much as listening, offering the kind of understanding I'd wished for when I'd been trying to find my place. When Nikolai found us later, Riley was calmer, smiling even, making plans to talk to the Omega advisor about concerns she'd been too scared to voice before. After she left, Nikolai had pulled me aside. "Do you know what you just did? Listened to someone who needed it? You gave her something no Omega advisor or council member could. Genuine empathy from someone who understands isolation. She came to you because you're not trying to fit her into a predetermined role. You're showing her she can build her own path." He'd cupped my face gently. "That's exactly what this pack needs. What I need. Someone who sees people as individuals, not just positions to be filled. One conversation doesn't prove anything." "No, but it's not one conversation. It's everything you've been doing for months. The way you treat the staff, The relationships you've built with pack members who never expected to matter to an Alpha King's mate. The work you've continued in the archives, maintaining your own identity while also growing into this role. His eyes held mine intently. You're not becoming who you think I need. You're showing everyone who you actually are. And it's perfect. The formal mate ceremony was scheduled for the winter solstice, 6 months after that first dance. The council had pushed for something sooner, or much later, depending on who was arguing. But Nikolai had been firm. 6 months to prove the relationship had substance, to let me establish myself within the pack, to build a foundation before making permanent commitments. The night before the ceremony, I couldn't sleep. I stood in the estate gardens where I'd considered fleeing that first night, looking up at stars that seemed impossibly bright in the cold winter air. Second thoughts? Damien's voice came from behind me. He'd taken to appearing when I needed to talk, but hadn't realized it yet. Third, fourth, and fifth thoughts, I admitted. Tomorrow, I officially become the Alpha King's mate. Tomorrow, my life stops being entirely mine and becomes part of something bigger. Tomorrow, every decision I make affects not just me, but an entire pack. Terrifying, he agreed, coming to stand beside me. Also inevitable. You've already been affecting the pack for months. Tomorrow just makes it official. What if I'm not good enough? What if the council was right and I can't handle this? Then you'll learn. You'll adapt. You'll become good enough. He smiled at my skeptical look. You know how I know? Because you've already done it. 6 months ago, you were invisible. Now pack members seek you out for advice. Warriors respect you. Even Councillor Thorne has stopped openly campaigning against you, which is basically her version of acceptance. She still doesn't like me. No, but she respects what you've accomplished, which matters more. He turned to face me fully. Alara, I'm going to tell you something I probably should have said months ago. That night at the party, when I danced with you first, I knew exactly who you were. Nick had been talking about the brilliant archivist for weeks, making excuses to walk past your workspace, acting like a lovesick teenager. I danced with you partly because you seemed interesting, but mostly to push him into action. He'd been circling for months, trying to convince himself it was too complicated, that choosing you would cause too many problems. I stared at him. You were manipulating us? I was giving him the push he needed. And you needed to see that you could exist in our world, that you weren't invisible to everyone. He grinned, unrepentant. Worked pretty well, I'd say. You're marrying my brother tomorrow. The pack is stronger for having you. And I get to watch Councillor Thorne's plans crumble. Everyone wins. Despite everything, I laughed. You're terrible. I prefer strategically meddlesome. His expression grew more serious. But truly, Alara, you deserve this. You deserve happiness, recognition, a place where you belong. Don't let fear convince you otherwise. The ceremony itself was simpler than I'd expected. Yes, there were formal elements. The traditional words, the symbolic bindings, the public declarations before the assembled pack. But Nikolai had stripped away the excessive pomp that usually accompanied such events, focusing instead on the meaning beneath. When he took my hands in his, standing before the pack and the council and everyone who doubted this would work, his voice was steady and sure. I choose Alara not because she brings political advantage or territorial connections. I choose her because she sees clearly, acts with integrity, and makes me better than I could be alone. I choose her because in a world of performance and strategy, she offered authenticity. Because when everyone else told me who I should be, she let me be who I am. My own vows came from somewhere deep and honest. I choose Nikolai not because he's the Alpha King, but because he's the man who noticed when others overlooked me, who valued truth over convenience, who carries immense responsibility with grace, and still makes time to hear about obscure historical treaties. I choose him because he makes space for me to be fully myself, while also challenging me to become more. Because he offered partnership instead of protection, equality instead of rescue. When we sealed the bond, that mystical, inexplicable connection that tied mates together, I felt it settle into place like a key turning in a lock. Not ownership, not possession, but recognition. Two people choosing to build something together, stronger for the joining than either could be alone. The celebration afterward was genuine, the earlier tension having transformed into something like acceptance. Pack members who'd been skeptical made toasts celebrating the unconventional choice that had proven wise. Young wolves approached to thank me for showing them that belonging didn't require fitting predetermined molds. Even Counselor Thorne, though she didn't smile, raised her glass in acknowledgement. Cassius pulled me aside at one point, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it. "You've surprised me," he admitted. "I thought Nikolai was making an emotional decision that would complicate everything. Instead, you've become exactly what this pack needed. Someone who leads through connection rather than authority. Someone who reminds us that strength comes in many forms." "I'm still learning," I said honestly. "We all are. That's the point." He smiled. "Welcome to the family, officially. Though I suspect you've been family for months. We just needed the ceremony to acknowledge it." Later, much later, when the celebration had wound down, and Nikolai and I finally retreated to our private rooms, he pulled me close and whispered against my hair, "Any regrets?" "None." "You?" "Only that I didn't dance with you 6 months earlier." He pulled back to look at me, love and contentment clear in his expression. "Thank you for taking a chance on this. On us. Thank you for seeing me when I thought I was invisible." We stood there wrapped in each other, in the quiet certainty that we'd found something rare and worth fighting for. Outside, the winter solstice moon hung bright and full, blessing new beginnings and the courage it took to choose them. In the months and years that followed, I continued my work in the archives, while also growing into my role as mate. Riley, the young Omega who'd sought me out, became a regular visitor, eventually bringing other pack members who felt out of place or uncertain. I became an unofficial counselor, offering the kind of understanding that came from personal experience rather than training. Damien found his own path eventually, leaving the estate to lead a smaller pack in the Southern Territories, where his easy charm and genuine care for people proved perfect for building community. He visited often, always bringing stories and laughter. Celine accepted a position on the council, replacing one of the older members who retired. She brought a new generation's perspective, challenging traditions that no longer served their purpose while honoring those that still did. Even Counselor Thorne eventually softened, not into friendship exactly, but into grudging mutual respect. When her niece, the calculating woman who'd been meant for Nikolai, found her own mate in a neighboring pack, Thorne actually apologized for her early hostility. "I thought I knew what was best," she'd said stiffly. "I was protecting tradition when I should have been embracing evolution." Nikolai and I built a life that honored both his responsibilities and my needs, both the public role and the private person. We had arguments and challenges, moments where the weight of leadership felt crushing, times when navigating pack politics tested our patience. But we also had quiet mornings, shared laughter, the steady certainty of being chosen and choosing in return. 5 years after that first dance, I stood in the same estate gardens where I'd once considered fleeing, where I'd later stood questioning whether I belonged. This time, I watched pack children playing, heard the sounds of a gathering that celebrated not crisis, but simple community. Nikolai appeared beside me, sliding an arm around my waist with the easy familiarity of long partnership. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I almost ran that night, that I almost let fear convince me I didn't belong here. I'm glad you didn't." He pressed a kiss to my temple. "Though I would have chased you, probably made a complete fool of myself tracking you down to convince you to give this a chance. You wouldn't have had to chase far. I think part of me knew even then that this was where I belonged. I just needed the courage to believe it." We stood together, watching the pack, our pack, live and laugh and build the kind of community where everyone could find their place, even those who didn't fit traditional molds. Where strength came in many forms, where leadership meant connection as much as authority, where a packless archivist could become a mate and a counselor, and proof that belonging isn't about where you come from, but about choosing where you stand. And I stood here, beside the man who'd seen me when I thought I was invisible, who'd chosen me when logic said he shouldn't, who'd built with me something stronger than political alliance or strategic advantage, a partnership based on truth, authenticity, and the simple, profound courage of being fully ourselves. The winter wind carried the scent of pine and snow and home. I leaned into Nikolai's warmth, feeling the mate bond hum between us, that inexplicable connection that had started with a dance and grown into a life. "Wrong brother, honey," he murmured, echoing those first words that had changed everything. and I felt his smile against my hair. "Right choice," I replied, and meant it with every part of my being. The story that had begun with fear and uncertainty had transformed into belonging and love. Not despite the challenges, but because we'd faced them together, building something real in a world that too often settled for performance. And in the end, that was the greatest truth I'd learned. Belonging isn't found, it's created. One brave choice at a time, one authentic connection at a time, one moment of courage at a time. This was my place. This was my pack. This was my love. And I was finally completely home.